I love Deltarune. You love Deltarune. We all love Deltarune. This simple fact is why you rarely see any of the well-known Deltarune theorists making videos about why Deltarune secretly sucks. So I've brought it upon myself to fulfill that role. To be the one to go against the grain and bring forth an army of haters on this land, to blaspheme against the god of games, Toby Fox, and tell him he sucks. Despite Deltarune checking all of my boxes when it comes to very specific hyper-niche things I like in fiction, quiet autumn town, creepy underlying mystery, the general sense that something's wrong, an ever-present sense of nostalgia and longing for something lost, I still feel like the logic behind Deltarune's combat design is quite confounding. And in order to fully explain what I mean, we need to start at the beginning. Undertale, as an experience, only worked because of the combat system. The whole game put a spin on the concept of the ordinary RPG. While you can fight, and it's usually the easiest and quickest option, the narrative asks you to find ways to become friends with every monster via the act system. Rather than take that easy way out, you're encouraged to solve a mini puzzle every battle by figuring out what combination of actions will make the monster want to stop fighting. For Vegetoid, you have to eat your greens. For Ice Cap, you have to ignore him twice in a row. The system isn't as simple as what buttons in what order, though. The actions all mean something, and you have to determine, based on what the monster is saying, what the best course of action is. Some enemies have multiple ways to spare them, like magic, making the combat system feel much more robust than it actually is. And that's the thing, I have a hard time calling Undertale's battle system a great system. A system, when referring to game development, is a series of mechanics or parts that work together to make a whole. I know there are many ways to define what a system is, but a good example of what I'm specifically referring to is, well, any standard RPG. Their battle systems consist of information being stored on both sides of the battlefield, and giving you a list of actions you can take. This is a system. A pretty basic one. I personally believe that a good system is able to be scaled and works in tandem with other systems, allowing the whole game to mold together and become one whole. Exactly what I mean can be demonstrated by looking at a game like Final Fantasy VII. In the beginning of the game, you have a simple list of commands, very little damage being dealt on all sides, and the very beginnings of a good toolset. But by the end of the game, you not only have a robust battle menu offering you dozens of different movement options, but you also have multiple systems working together. Theoretically speaking, while it would kill the pacing narratively, you could add 20 hours onto Final Fantasy VII's back half and just scale up. Higher enemy damage, a deeper selection of combat options, more materia, and the battle system would still hold up. Undertale's combat system has a limit to how high you can scale it up, especially in Pacifist. With your stats staying pretty stagnant throughout the entire game, there's only so much damage that late-game enemies can do. Yes, the core has some pretty tough foes, but Undertale's act system works the same way at the end of the game as it does in the beginning. There's only one solution to every battle. One right answer, and that answer is sparing. The strategy you have to figure out isn't what action to take, it's what should I say or do to this monster. Undertale kind of holds your hand in a way that makes a lot of the battles feel scripted. You must spare Toriel a certain number of times for the battle to end. That's the only one option, that's the strategy. Papyrus is similar, and for Undertale that works. See, I'm not complaining about Undertale at all. The thing is, it would be very hard to build a massive battle system when there's 0 point to fighting. The best option is getting away from all fights. Undertale doesn't ask you to fight the same enemies over and over, besides the ruins in a specific stretch of waterfall, and that's because Undertale doesn't want to be a proper RPG. You aren't encouraged to fight, you gain no stats or boosts from sparing, so it would be really stupid to bombard you with random encounters in the way most RPGs do. You might be wondering what I'm getting at. I'm going to move on to discussing Deltarune's combat, but before that, I want to quickly talk numbers. I watched multiple playthroughs of Undertale to gather some statistics. These were all pacifist playthroughs, none of which were exceptionally odd. I watched around 4 or 5 and took some notes. In the effort of simplicity, I'll be discussing 3 playthroughs. Playthrough A, Playthrough B, and Playthrough C. The answer I wanted to find out is how many encounters in total are in a basic playthrough of Undertale, minus any story-relevant characters or bosses. I'm not counting one-time scripted enemies either, like the 2 knights or the dogs. I'm talking purely basic enemy encounters that can be randomly caused. I don't care how many enemies are in each encounter either, I'm only counting the number of encounters. In Playthrough A, they had 35 encounters in total. Playthrough B encountered 34 encounters in total. Playthrough C met with 39 encounters in total. In my own playthrough, I found that number is actually higher than what I got by about 6, but that's mostly because I know exactly where to go at all times. Let's round up actually and say 40 encounters. That seems fair to me. On the basic playthrough of Undertale, you'll have around 40 regular enemy encounters. Most of them take place in Ruins and Waterfall. There are only a few in Snowdin and Hotland. That's because a lot of the Snowdin battles are with the dogs, one-time story enemies, which, again, I'm not counting. The core can have, I'm not sure how much max, but in my experience, it was about 7, and that's what I got for most of the playthroughs as well. So why am I so hung up on this? Deltarune's biggest flaw is its combat system. On the one hand, it's gotten a major overhaul from Undertale. On the other hand, I feel the system is at war with the game itself. Let's start with that overhaul. In most battles, you have 3 characters, Chris, Susie, and Ralsei. They cannot be swapped out. However, periodically, you'll be paired solo with a different character, like when it was just you and Ralsei in Chapter 1, or when you're walking with Noelle in Chapter 2. Characters have basic stats. Their health bars are stuck at a relatively capped amount. Your stats, specifically attack and magic, do go up if you fight enemies. As always, your stats stay the exact same after battles on Pacifist, although they do go up between chapters. The community's current thoughts usually circle back to the area of, oh, maybe the sealing the fountains makes you stronger in general. I don't know what it is lore-wise. I personally think it's something else, but that's a whole different discussion. So largely, in terms of the effects of choosing pacifist, or what's easiest to refer to as violence, the results are pretty much the same as Undertale. You get stronger or you don't. Either way, you make some money from encounters. The inclusion of the pacifist option in Deltarune is odd to me, mostly because the narrative no longer calls for it. Yes, there is some discussion between characters as to whether or not we should or shouldn't fight, but the game has told us that our choices don't matter. And despite the fact that theoretically this concept could be turned on us later on, revealing our choices did matter, so far they largely don't. Yes, there are some narrative differences. Sparing gives you a much more cheerful ending to Chapter 1, but either way, King is defeated. Pacifism is no longer the point, so there's no real reason to want us to be pacifists. No enemies actually die. No matter whether we play as a pacifist or violently, the end result is largely the same. So what's my problem with it? Well, let's talk about what these battles actually entail. Every battle you have 5 possible actions: fight, act or magic depending on character, item, spare, or defend. So far, very similar to Undertale, but there are 2 very different things: the TP meter and the fact that there are 3 characters. Let's first go over each action. Fight allows you to do a single melee hit on an enemy. You time your button press to get a higher damage output. If you want to do lots of damage to any particular enemy, having all 3 characters attack will allow you to absolutely pummel them. Act, or as I said, magic depending on character, is very interesting. It works differently from Chapter 1 to Chapter 2. In Chapter 1, Chris was the only one who can act, working nearly identically to the way it does in Undertale. In Chapter 2, Ralsei and Susie get the ability to act as well. However, rather than choose a specific action to take, it's simply S action or R action, abilities that add a predetermined amount to the enemy's mercy meter. Magic allows Susie and Ralsei to cast spells. Susie primarily has attack spells, but learns Ultimate Heal in Chapter 2, which is useless right now, but Toby implies will be important later on. Ralsei's spells are largely healing-based. Ralsei also has Pacify, which allows a tired enemy to be spared. There's a balance found between choosing to spend your TP on Susie's attacks or Ralsei's healing. Or there would be a balance if the game didn't... or I'll get back to that. Spare works exactly as you'd expect. If an enemy's mercy meter is at 100, you can spare them. Simple. Defend allows a character to take less damage that round and also fills up your TP meter. Oh yeah, the TP meter. Essentially, there are a few ways to fill it up. Grazing very close to enemy bullets, defending, melee attacking, or specific items slowly grow your TP meter. Your spells all cost TP. Great, so we get it. Sounds good. Works good. But does it work good? See, remember earlier I said the system is at war with itself. Here's the thing about most RPGs. There is one way to end the battle. You deplete the enemy's health. All of your abilities and options in battle are aimed towards helping you achieve that goal in one way or another. That being said, there are 2 games that come to mind which give you a different set of tools in battle. Pokemon and Shin Megami Tensei give you the ability to, rather than fight, recruit the enemy. Pokemon gives you Pokeballs, which, when thrown at a Pokemon, allow you to capture them. Shin Megami Tensei has a demon negotiation mechanic where you can try and convince them to join you. That being said, both of these systems don't require you to completely alter your battle strategy. They're small side features that complement the main battle system, not an alternative way to play. Pokemon requires you to deal damage to the Pokemon in order to increase the chances of catching it. They work hand in hand with the combat. Deltarune, on the contrary, has two battle systems in one. See, here's the thing with sparing. Chapter 2 made it so both Susie and Ralsei can act. Not only that, but many of Chris's acts require other characters to use up their turn. For example, when fighting Task Manager, Order X increases her mercy by 25%, which takes up the entire team, compared to Order, which only uses Chris's turn and increases it by 10. If you're going to choose to be a pacifist, your entire playstyle is different, and you will most likely not utilize any of the violent tools handed to you. There's no reason to use any of Susie's magic skills. The option that most of the time is correct is using whatever the highest percentage act is. For Task Manager, that's Order X. If any of your characters are damaged enough for you to worry, glance at your TP. Seeing that there's no reason to spend it anymore, because remember, the only thing you could use it on is healing or fighting, there's a high chance you have a lot of it and you can use Ralsei's healing. Otherwise, you just have either Susie or Ralsei use a healing item. In that case where you can no longer use the act that requires the whole team to chime in, you use whatever sparing option Chris has, mixed with either S action or R action depending on who's busy. What I just described is the one correct answer to nearly every single battle in Deltarune. After all, the only reason that R action and S action were added is because in a pacifist playthrough, Susie literally has zero purpose. This was a pretty big problem in Chapter 1. Look at the Super Boss, the most difficult fight in the game. What was the strategy? Well, since all Susie can do is use violence or defend, the right answer is to use the highest percentage act, and periodically heal. Toby got around this problem with King by making the correct strategy doing nothing. Literally defend every turn and there you go. Versus Susie and Lancer, use your highest act. Versus Head Hathy, use the highest act taking up Susie's turn and have Ralsei do nothing. Versus I forgot this guy's name, use Ralsei's 3 acts one after another. 90% of pacifist fights throw away the concept of multiple characters in your party. The other problem I have is that sparing drops a lot of the problem solving that Undertale had. In Undertale, each act did a different thing and worked in the context of your encounter with the enemy. A sad enemy, for example, with the options of cheer or laugh, would require you to first cheer them up before laughing, otherwise they'd think you're laughing at them. It's nothing mind-blowing, but it required the player to be present in the encounter. Now, a lot of Undertale's enemies would require you to just press one button twice, sure, but oftentimes you wouldn't know what that button was. When fighting Washua, trying to touch him would end with him being annoyed with you, whereas you need to have him clean you. It's like trying to understand the personalities of the enemies. In Deltarune, this is largely gone. Yes, there are some enemies with what I'd call light problem solving, and a few where it's just a little mini-game like aiming Chris at the wear-wires, but oftentimes it's just click the one button. Let's look at some real-time examples of my struggles with the system. Oh, okay, here's an interesting example. 2 tasks. Now, there's no altogether option, so I have to choose either roar or soft voice. Neither one is explained, so let's just do soft voice. I don't have S action yet, but if I did, I would have used it against one of the tasks, because remember, that's pretty much the only logical choice when Susie and Ralsei aren't doing an altogether act. Oh, look at that. Soft voice filled both enemies' mercy bar. Great, okay, so I'll just spare them then. Alright, but what would roar have done? Okay, here's 2 more. Let's use roar on them. Now they're tired, so I have to use Ralsei's Pacify on them, but seeing as he can only do it once, that means rather than the 2-turn battle using soft voice, I now have to take an extra turn to get them both. I wouldn't call this depth or forming strategies, this is just one attack being marginally better than another. It's not like now I know, oh, in the future soft voice is more effective than roar, these acts are enemy specific. Not only that, but given the 3 turns sparing them using roar requires, after using roar I could have used soft voice and spared them in the same amount of turns, rendering this act completely useless. And this also shows my thoughts regarding the lack of real problem solving. There is one option, one button, it doesn't require any thinking. You don't need to figure out, oh, should I roar at it? Or would it respond more positively to being softly spoken to? It really doesn't matter. Either way, while sure, one will take an extra turn, you have one strategy, and following it gets you out of the battle. Okay, so how about Viro-Kun? Well, there's really only one option here. Take Care X. Yup, that does it. But what about Take Care? Is there any realistic scenario where that's the better option? Well, just for shits and giggles, let's find out. Okay, I got one of them. No real benefit here. Similarly, if I had R and S action, I could have just used that and spared the other one, meaning it has the same effect as using Take Care X. And see, this is my problem. Playing as a pacifist gives you way less options in combat. You no longer need to balance 3 different characters either, because there's usually one correct option that uses up everyone's turn. In the case of the best action requiring only 2 characters, whoever isn't acting simply uses S or R action on the enemies. There's no problem solving, there's nothing. It's click the best buttons unless someone needs to be healed, in which you have to click the slightly less good buttons. Even in this example, 3 different enemy types, not only will the right answer every time come down to one by one use their best acts, and in the case it requires 2 people, use S or R action on the other, but using any of the altogether acts fills everyone's meter 50%. I left this room 4 times in a row and did this fight over and over, each time using a different act strategy, and every time, every strategy cost the same amount of turns and didn't really change anything. It really doesn't matter. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Spookydood, you hypocrite, you said that Undertale was good because it had one option, and Deltarune is bad because it has one option. That doesn't make any sense. But my point is, A, Undertale's one option wasn't as basic as this. You have to still figure out what acts to do, and 2, the one option in Undertale was fun, whereas Deltarune's is infinitely less fun, as I'm trying to explain to you. It just removes all depth from the combat in a game where you're fighting a lot of the same enemies over and over. So what's the problem though? Okay, Deltarune's pacifist combat isn't amazing, who cares? And yeah, you're right, I wouldn't complain about something like this unless the game itself gave you a much better alternative. The combat is interesting. When playing violently, you actually have to balance 3 characters' moves. When you're in any battle, do you want to go all in on melee attacks? Or, unlike Pacifist, should you spend some of that TP on Susie's spells? Or should you save that TP for Ralsei's healing spells? And if you're already attacking them with 2 characters, should you use an item to keep another character alive? The Task Manager fight specifically is interesting in the sense that you have to choose which enemy to fight as well. The bullet hell sections show you each individual enemy's attacks. In this fight, we see that Task Manager's attack isn't that hard to dodge, but her 2 cats make things difficult. Do you focus on Task Manager, or do you take out the cats? There is variation in how you choose to play. Sure, Pacifist allows you to choose which order to pacify an enemy, but regardless of your decision, it takes the same amount of turns, and oftentimes the best act option for one enemy fills the bars of the other enemies. And there's something else. Ralsei's Pacify spell works if an enemy is damaged enough. If an enemy has a tired status effect, there's a great option to defeat them quickly. There's variation, and that's found especially in a fight like Jevil. Rather than clicking the one right button, that simple choice between using a high-cost attack or saving your TP for health is incredibly effective here. Not only all that, but by fighting you get stronger. Your stats go up. There's a reason to want to fight enemies. Now, this is no Final Fantasy. I'd say this combat is still pretty surface level, but for what Deltarune is, a mostly narrative experience in the shape of an RPG, it works perfectly. So, is that it? My conclusion is that Deltarune's pacifist system is infinitely less interesting and less fun than the combat? Well, no, because that's not really proof that Deltarune is flawed. Why not just choose to play violently if I like it so much? And that's where my second argument comes in. Not only is pacifist less interesting than violence in terms of gameplay, but Deltarune effectively forces you to play pacifist, as it punishes you for playing differently. Deltarune has one more system I haven't mentioned, the recruit system. If you spare enough of a certain enemy type, they are recruited, and they join your castle town. You can see them later and read about them and pose them in the cafe, they help you during important narrative moments, and more. There is absolutely a benefit to collecting them all. But Spookydood, wait a minute, how does this force you to be a pacifist? Well, the thing is, the system makes it so you can never ever kill. Why don't you fight them, weaken them, and then pacify them? First off, you don't reap the benefits of fighting like increased stats. Second, pacifist is usually the easier option. Third, if, God forbid, you slip up and fail to calculate exactly when you should stop hitting them, and you kill an enemy, they are never able to be recruited. That permanently loses them. Not only that, but if you kill an enemy you've already recruited, they get unrecruited. It's like when you're lowering a Pokemon's health so you can catch them, except if you accidentally beat one, you can never get them again. This means that you're punished for ever playing too violently. Not only that, but fighting makes the narrative infinitely less satisfying in a way that seems like it's purposefully trying to punish you. Queen is sad that Castletown is empty, specifically asking for the people that you killed. Birdley's arm breaks, the Thrash Machine no longer has everyone's support. In a game where the silly fun characters and moments are some of the best parts, fighting really hurts the experience. Regardless of whether you're okay with losing the recruits, stopping you from retrieving the collectibles counts as punishment. But before I move on, I have to admit, I think I know why he did this, why he added mechanics between chapters 1 and 2 to make it so that fighting is punished. And it all comes down to Noelle. Say you like the cool spells. You've been fighting all these enemies, there's no reason not to, and you get Noelle on your team. You fight an enemy and you realize, hey, she sucks at melee. Well, she's got a spell, Ice Shock. Cool. Alright, let's try it out. Huh. The enemy is frozen in place. I wonder if this is important. And while many players might not realize it right then and there, I bet a bunch of people would have accidentally started or found out about the route that's supposed to be hidden. Sure, it still requires specific steps, but making it so that fighting is punished adds that extra barrier around the route that guarantees most players won't find it right away. Here's the thing though, it irks me because, like I said, Pacifist is very tedious at times. Queen's Castle has some of the most annoying enemies to spare. This puzzle is cool the first time, I guess, but really, really annoying the second or third time. Not only is it much less fun than Undertale, but there's so much more of it. I watched those Undertale playthroughs, and on average, it took the player about 40 seconds to a minute to beat the very, very late game enemies, like Night Knight and the core enemies. The longest time I saw was 1 minute and 30 seconds, and it's not like they were a wizard or anything. In the playthroughs I watched of Deltarune, the average player took about 1.5 minutes to beat the 3-mouse battle, and 45 seconds to beat the 2-mouse battle. And I saw 2 different players get stuck at the Swatch battle for 2 minutes. That's a really long time, especially since many enemies respawn in a game where there's zero benefit to fighting them, in a game where backtracking is highly, highly encouraged. Now we know that there's eggs, crystals, and bosses and routes tucked away in the corners of each Dark World. That's going to mean a lot of running around and trying to find secrets, and that's going to mean a lot of encounters. There were about 35 to 40 non-single-time enemy encounters in Undertale. Do you know how many there are in Deltarune so far, on the average playthrough that doesn't even look for the super bosses? 35. And you can't flee them. And we're not even 25% into the game. I think the final point I want to make is that on a narrative level, Deltarune Chapter 1 tells us that the world isn't black and white. Sometimes we should try to get by without fighting, but fighting is okay. It's not an automatically bad thing. Whereas Chapter 2 takes a sharp left turn and tells us, no, it is a bad thing by default, never do it. And that's the point of this video. Not only is the pacifist system infinitely worse than it is in Undertale, infinitely worse than the other combat options in Deltarune, very tedious the more you fight the same enemies and press the same buttons, but it's also forced on you, as the more interesting options are punished. But there's one more point to discuss. See, there is a fantastic, really, really well thought out argument that kinda does blow my whole stance on this away. Who cares? Chances are, if you're watching this years after any release of the game, you liked the game enough to not mind the pacifist gameplay. I enjoyed my playthrough of Chapter 2 so much that I played it again. Multiple times, actually. Sure, I really do believe the arguments I'm making here. I think that the pacifist gameplay isn't as good as fighting, but I don't really think it's ruining the game or anything like that. Like I said, Deltarune is more of a narrative experience than a game trying to build a robust combat system. If anything, I think we'd see an influx of people agreeing with me only after the rest of the game comes out, if it truly is about 25 to 30 hours to beat the game on the main route. Maybe then people would start seeing my point. But I really don't think that I'm going to mind that much. On top of which, while the depth in terms of decision-making isn't that great, a lot of the acts are little mini-games that are cute and fun. Capturing the mice, throwing Chris, stacking Bloxer, it's just fun little mini-games that make the experience enjoyable. Don't take this as me going back on what I'm saying. If this isn't addressed at some point, and the pacifist gameplay stays as surface level as it is right now, and that one strategy is the same strategy we use on endgame enemies, I will certainly complain about that. But it's not the biggest deal in the world. That being said, tell me in the comments whether or not you agree. My name is Spookydood, and thank you for watching.